Audio Unleashed. Oh, by the way, I want to start this week by telling people about our AMA. We should do that off the bat. Yeah. So everybody, we announced this last episode in the Patreon segment, but we are doing an Ask Me Any or Ask Us Anything video. And we don't really quite know when. It's just when we have as many questions as we kind of feel like it's a good number. We're going to do it. So if you go to our Patreon right now, patreon.com/audio unleashed, you can see there's a post there where you can ask us anything. And do you want to know how we produce the podcast, or do you want to know, I don't know, anything? It's anything. What do you want to know? Go ask us. And like I said, as soon as we've got enough questions, we're going to shoot a video. And then I'm going to drink heavily. What are you talking about this week, buddy?
We're going to start with a discussion about an article that was done by Bruno Putzis, who's a famous amp and, I guess, speaker designer, mostly really amp, though, that was in hometheaterhifi.com. And it's called Life on the Edge, a personal perspective on the past, present, and future of Class D audio amplifiers. And it is, I think, kind of must reading. I think it'll be over a lot of people's heads in ways. It'll be a little outside a lot of people's comfort zone. Actually, parts of it were outside mine. And I've been doing amplifier junk for decades. I think that he raises a lot of fantastic points. And there's things about Class D amplifier topology I did not know. It made me realize, like, I really don't know what's going on. I thought I did, but I really don't.
It made me realize my conception of Class D was pretty much locked in the 90s or so, you know?
Yeah, mine too.
Right. So
he's also got a fun sort of attitude and perspective on things. He's not just some, amp designer going blah, 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 blah. There's zero blah, blah, blah in his writing.
Did we see the word musical at any point in that write-up?
No, but the fact that he did not mention inner detail is going to severely impact his credibility with a lot of people.
Yeah. Anyway, after we get done with that, so last episode we talked about the FTC. This episode we're talking about the FTC again, but for completely different reasons. So this is FTC ruling on amplifier power ratings. You sent me this article that Gene Delasala of Audioholics did, and also a piece from John Atkinson talking about the updates to the amplifier rules. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's funny, I find in the last episode that audiophiles were talking a lot about the FTC when it didn't really apply to us too much, right? But this one does. This very much is directed at our industry, so it's going to be a little more relevant. And we're not putting this one behind the Patreon paywall because I think we got a little bit more to say, and it's not quite as esoteric. Would you agree?
Yeah. It's more amplifier stuff, but this is our special amplifier edition of Audio
Unleashed.
Because actually our third thing is also going to be about an amplifier.
Oh, yeah.
Although it's more about the review than about the amplifier. This is a review that I saw in Hi-Fi Plus by Alan Surcom, well-established audio reviewer. This reads more like the transcript of a political rally than it does an audio review.
Yeah.
But we're just going to go through it. This is a rich tradition here on Audio
Unleashed,
where, we go through reviews that we don't like and read quotes from them and, stuff like that. But, we're playing the hits, man. This is our free bird.
Oh, God. Can we come up with a better example than that? We've kind of leaned on this as our free bird before.
Well, this is our greatest hit.
Yeah, there you go. We'll argue about what that means later. So,
yeah.
But finally, for patrons, we've got an article from John Darko digging into these new Marantz speakers. It's titled "Marantz Steps into the Unknown with Grand Horizon." I got the press pitch for these things. These are new flat, spherical, streaming active speaker models from Marantz, a company that's not really known for speakers anymore, although they were back in my day, but, it's been a long time since anybody said Marantz and speakers in the same sentence. Yeah. But, these are, as you pointed out in our idea board, very similar to like some stuff that Devialet's been doing. So we're going to talk about these. We're going to talk about Well, is this the future of stereo? We're going to talk about, does this approach work? We're going to talk about all sorts of things. But
so is mono the future of stereo?
Oh, you're going to give it away, huh? You're teasing them.
Well, we got to get people to pay for the Patreon segment.
There you go, man. There you go.
We got to really tease that one. Really pump it up.
Yeah. But first, let's dig into Class D amplifiers, man, because we know that's the topic that's hot on everybody's mind at the moment. So
kind of is.
So this comes from Secrets of Home Theater and Hi-Fi. And Secrets of Home Theater and High Fidelity, I should say, which they're celebrating their 30th anniversary right now. So, yeah, it's a piece from Bruno Putzis, who most people who know who Bruno Putzis is know it's a Class D amplifier designer. What I really loved about this, and we talked a little bit when we first teased it about the stuff we really liked, but I think the biggest deal here is that this is the most cogent and sort of digestible breakdown of not only the history of Class D, but how it works and why it took so long to become prevalent. I mean, I didn't even know about the whole 1930s thing. I thought Class D was pretty much developed in the 60s, but he goes on to talk about, Bernice Bedford's patent filed in 1930 using a pair of triodes acting as power switches and comparators. And he goes in to analyze this sort of patent, and he's like, I kind of think the dude actually built it and made it work based on these measurements. So
it sure looks like it, yeah.
That was pretty wild, but yeah, and then he digs into this sort of, what happened in the late 60s, and he glosses past that a little, but the biggest thing for me is he sort of starts with the topology of a Class D amplifier, and he brings out this design, a sort of, block diagram, and I'm looking at it going, yeah, that's the way Class D works. And then he goes on to say, yeah, that's not really how Class D works. I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to need a seatbelt here. We're going for a ride. I mean, right off the bat, he's blowing up preconceptions. And anyway, I'm rambling here. What did you think about it?
Well, what blew me away? There's just so much here that's really great. And a lot of it kind of confirms things that you and I have said, although it confirms them from different viewpoints. What blew me away was, look, the way we think of a Class D amplifier, right, is we think of one side of it is the audio signal coming in, and the other side of it is a sawtooth wave from an oscillator that's at like 250 kilohertz or 500 kilohertz or something, right? And, basically the differential amplifier compares the two signals and outputs one or the other, and you get what's basically a pulse wave modulated signal. You get, nothing but on and off, right?
Right.
And then when you filter, so that goes into an amplifier, and the amplifier is super efficient because it doesn't have the sort of in-between stages that a normal linear amplifier would have, right? There's no heat or very little heat being chewed up. It's either off or on.
Right.
Then it goes into a filter, which basically rolls off all the high frequencies, all the radio frequency stuff from the say 250 kilohertz carrier, and you get an audio signal. All right, that's the textbook way that these run. This is frankly the way I have always thought they run. But he says, no, they did run that way, but they don't now. Basically, what they do is they have a feedback loop set up on it to where it self-oscillates. Because an amplifier, if you run an amplifier without a feedback loop or without something to control the high frequencies, it'll just oscillate. It'll just go, right? But at higher frequencies that fry the whole thing. This is why most amplifiers have a roll-off at 50 kilohertz or whatever, right?
Right.
So they don't oscillate. But in this case, you're actually using the oscillation. Instead of having an oscillator there running at 250K, you're actually using the feedback loop to create an oscillation. So the whole thing self-oscillates, and that ends up being the RF signal. And he points out that you get a whole lot of benefits from doing this. Better gain, lower noise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's this maxim in audio that simpler is better. Right. And quite often that is wrong. But this is one of the cases where it's right.
Yeah.
That was fascinating to me. But then he goes on and really talks about, he really kind of trashes a lot of ideas in audio And I love how he talks about how typical linear amplifiers have been designed. Basically, somebody came up with something that somebody liked, and they called that a reference.
Yeah.
And then they kept changing the design until someone liked the next thing better, and they called that a reference.
Right.
And, lather, rinse, repeat, right?
Right.
And they just kept doing that. And basically, it's meaningless. And because, as he says, look, the job of the amplifier is to make a small input louder without changing it.
Right.
And any change is negative. Right now, there's a lot of high-end amplifiers who are, intentionally adding distortion these days, which I think is dumb. Because the artist, speaking as an artist, I can add that whenever I want. I don't need some amp designer to decide after the fact that my music needs more distortion in it.
Correct.
Just because it makes it sound more subjectively appealing, whatever, right? He also talks a lot about the sort of idea that, feedback is bad. He's saying basically, look, feedback is really essential to these designs. They don't really work without it, especially with the self-oscillating aspect of it. And
the biggest thing for me in that in that domain that sort of like was eye-opening for me, and maybe it shouldn't have been, but it was. I'm just being honest here, where he's talking about the fact that, like, okay, if you design an amp not to have feedback, adding feedback is really, really difficult. So it's like you can't do a direct comparison of, okay, this design with and without feedback. And I thought, oh, God, that's obvious after the fact, but I never really thought about it that way.
I didn't either.
Yeah. I mean, that's hugely consequential. The other part that I really loved with regard to distortion is when he was talking about GAN-FETs. You and I, when we were doing the Soundstage Audiophile podcast, did an episode about GAN-FETs, and we're like, yeah, everybody's going to be like, this is the revolution in sound. And we're like, maybe not. And he sort of backs up what we said, and I'm seeing all the time, publications are like, oh, this GAN-FET thing makes Class D sound like Class A. And it's like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. But he goes through and he talks about how GAN-FETs, are faster and easier to use than silicone, but if you drop GAN-FETs in an existing Class D amplifier design, you can hope to improve distortion by a factor of 2 or so. And he goes on to say, but what's a single-digit reduction, considering that in the past few years, we've reduced distortion several thousand times using nothing but an extra op amp and a few passives. And then he talks about, where was it? He talks about his competitors at ICE and describes their short rundown on GAN-FETs as, when you know what you're doing, GAN doesn't really move the needle and is a waste of money. We'll do GAN for you if you think it helps you sell products, but don't expect any enthusiasm from us. Amen, he says, which goes to show, I mean, look, I'm for anything that improves efficiency, and I'm for anything that, decreases distortion within reason, but he's pointing out this is not the panacea. This is mostly a marketing thing, and I thought that was a really, really good point and a distinction that needed to be made.
Yeah, I love this line that he's got so many funny lines in here. He talks about whether Class D is getting as good as Class A. He's like, look, I have a lot of respect for the Boulders and Halcrows of the world. They have high-end amplifiers that are designed to have very good technical performance, right? But these are rare beasts. Most high-end Class A amp builders prefer to take the easy way out and promote a culture that celebrates sonic diversity. I just thought that's like what I was talking about with the guys who are adding distortion, or that's a single-ended design that has just some big honking transformer on the end of it that changes the sound of every speaker it's hooked up to.
Yeah.
And my attitude is these things don't really matter all that much. I mean, music comes out, you can appreciate it unless it's just really bad, but usually the speakers are the thing that are really bad.
Yeah.
But that's what I have a problem with is people heralding these things as somehow better and more musical. We're going to get to that in one of our following segments. But that's what I have a problem with, because I think what he has a problem with too is like these claims are just based on nothing, on some guy sitting there. This is me saying this, not him. It's just basically some guy sitting around in his t-shirt and underwear listening to tube amps and proclaiming one of them to be more musical, right? some guy who probably doesn't really know that much about music to begin with, and probably isn't that involved in the field, and also doesn't know much about engineering, and for whom this article would be sheer poison.
Yeah, I have to say kudos to Carlo La Raza of Secrets for running this to begin with, because the number of hi-fi publications that would have run this article, I can think of off the top of my head, maybe 3 or 4. I don't know.
Not too many.
A lot of them wouldn't. So kudos to him for running it, because I think it's great, and I think it needs to be read.
Well, I would say Stereophile would probably run it, but although it's kind of long. Although, hey, it's free.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But actually, I'm kind of looking at this thinking like, God, they're probably looking at this going, God, why didn't we run that? Because it's so good, and it's so well written, and Stereophile does dig in. I think it's more the people that are promoting, what did he call it? The celebrating sonic diversity or whatever. The magazines and websites now that are doing that are the ones that wouldn't want to publish this. And also it would be boring to them, because they tend to not be interested in the tech stuff. They're just interested in the music, which is good.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make them good judges of audio equipment.
Right. All right, buddy. Anything else to say about this one?
No, everybody should, if we're going to have one article, if we could only choose one article this year that you should go read, this would probably be my top nomination for that.
It would be way up there for me too. Yeah, this is good stuff. Like I said, props to Carlo for running it, man. This is really good stuff.
Good job.
All right, well, let's take a break, get some water, powder our noses, and come back and get outraged about something else. All right, buddy, I'm back.
So am I.
Welcome back
to Audio
Unleashed.
Yeah, what are we talking about?
Are we rolling now, man?
Go.
Okay, cool. All right.
Make it happen.
So this time we are talking about, I think the main thing is, well, it's 2 articles. One is from Gene Delasala of Audioholics. And the title of that is Audioholics Petition to Reopen FTC Final Amplifier Rule of 2024.
Yeah.
And the one from Stereophile, written by John Atkinson, is the FTC updates the quote-unquote amplifier rule. A lot of talk about these new rules for how amplifiers are measured. What's the bottom line here? I mean, what is the big deal? What do you think Gene is upset about and Atkinson is happy about?
Is Gene really upset?
Well, I don't know. I kind of got upset vibes. Am I wrong? Am I misreading him?
Well, I'm kind of, look, I have a lot of respect for both of these people. I find myself more in tune with Gene here, because Atkinson's just saying, look, the big things are that, look, we had the original FTC amplifier measurement rules were put into place in the early 1970s, I think. And that's because with amplifiers, there's a lot of ways to measure them, and you can get better results in ways that are kind of phony, right? Like you can measure just one channel of a stereo amp, right?
Yeah.
So your power supply doesn't get maxed out. You can measure only at 1 kilohertz. You can measure at a relatively high level of distortion.
You can measure 6 ohm load, which Sony does a lot.
6 ohm load. A lot of ways that you can fudge and you can measure at peak versus RMS. There's a lot of things you can do to fake your amplifier measurements and not really, and make them look a lot better than they really are, because people still buy products based on amplifier power, whether it be amplifiers or even, active products like, say, sound bars, where the sound bar is a total power of 1,000 watts or something that they listed at, which is bogus. But anyway, the FTC put this rule in place to fix a lot, as John Atkinson points out, to fix a lot of really specious claims that people were making back in the 60s. And let's face it, back in the 60s, it was really hard and expensive to build an amplifier with a lot of output, right? It's not now. That was put in place, but it really started to get pretty lax. And, the enforcement of it really kind of wasn't there. And I've had manufacturers lamenting this for probably 20 years at least, to me, of how I remember Chris Walker, now of ELAC, formerly Pioneer, talking about how, hey, look, we're printing legitimate amplifier measurements that tell exactly how we did the measurements, that tell the bandwidth, that tell the distortion, that all that stuff. But our competitors are not. So I think his solution was to publish both the bogus ones and the real ones, because he had to compete.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I was shocked that the FTC would care, first of all, at this point.
Yeah.
Because it seems like kind of small ball for the FTC when they're looking, they're staring, Google and Apple and Meta in the face. And then they're like, wait, amplifier measurements you're cared about? Yeah. So this came as a big surprise to me. I think they proposed in 2020 getting rid of the rule, but then they actually reinforced it. And I think probably the biggest change is that they do require you to specify it across a certain bandwidth, which John Atkinson says, well, fine, because, they're measuring it, power output at 1 kilohertz, which is sort of the industry standard for comparison's sake. But, they're going to also start measuring in stereophile at 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz, right? Where you can really, the power output can start to really lag. I measure for Wirecutter. I mean, I don't do a whole lot of this, but I run measurements on like the stereo amps that we review, which are, little cheap ones that are under $300. But I don't do 20 kilohertz. Probably I should, but I do 20 hertz because that's where a lot of these really cheap little amps start to sag, is in the bass. And honestly, you'll probably hear that, if an amp has higher distortion or less output at 20 kilohertz, well, you're not going to hear the distortion because the first distortion harmonic is at 40 kilohertz.
Right.
So you're not going to hear that. No matter what audiophile magazine told you can hear that. You can't hear that. And plus, how much musical content is there at 20 kilohertz? Well, none to speak of. Right. So if you look at any kind of a real-time analyzer plot of whatever music you want to put up there, there's just nothing happening at 20K. So I haven't done 20K because I just don't think it's that relevant. Maybe I should. I haven't for a long time. Also, you have to be more careful when you're measuring at 20K because it can, a lesser amplifier, we were talking about oscillation before, an amplifier that doesn't have the proper protection circuits, if you're starting to really push it at 20K, might start to oscillate, and then there will be smoke coming up from your test bench.
That's one of the things that Gene talks about a little bit, and also talks about how, that's not entirely relevant to actual listening material, just, test tones.
Right.
So,
and when I say smoke coming up from your test bench, I should have said flames.
Yeah.
And that is a real life scenario that actually happened to me, I think twice. And then I just stopped doing it.
Let me ask you this.
I didn't want amplifiers to blow up.
It seems to me that Gene's biggest beefs with all of this, and the reason he's asking for for it to be reopened, is his problems are, well, like I just alluded to, he has a problem with the fact that, band limited amplifiers are subjected to the same rules. And more importantly, and I think this is a bigger beef for him, he says the new FTC rule aims to impose a single test method on the entire category of audio, and that's a mistake. And he's talking about active speakers. One of the things that he's proposing is it would be more fair if active speaker amplifiers were allowed to be rated at the load impedance of the drivers they're paired with, which, I mean, that's a good point. It does affect the results. But what do you think about all of that?
Well, that's the key point. That's the point that, I mean, look, John Atkinson lives in a very different world than I do. I mean, most of my reviewing that people actually read is Bluetooth speakers and soundbars, all of which are active products. And I shouldn't say there are passive soundbars, but they are a very, very tiny percentage of the market, and they're all sold through CEDIA dealers. The 99 point something percent of the market is active products with amplifiers built in, right? And Bluetooth speakers are, by their very nature, active. Otherwise, they couldn't be Bluetooth. So in this world where most of the product we're dealing with, in the audio market is actually active, be it soundbars, Bluetooth speakers, Wi-Fi speakers. In the pro world, PA speakers, they're all active now. I guess there are still some passive ones you can buy and buy an amp, but nobody does that.
Well, there's some powered ones as well that aren't active.
Okay, I should say powered rather than active. Powered is what counts here, not active. Okay,
right.
So everything is powered now. I mean, it's only in the rarefied world of high-end audio that you still have, passive product. And that's also something that Bruno Putzis was ridiculing in his article, was talking about how, we have this idea that, having all these, what he calls, some kind of steampunk sculpture in between your speakers is the norm, right. Except it's not as good, right. But we cling to that norm. But
because it sure is cool looking, man. It sure is cool looking.
It is cool looking, man. But still, with active product, this is a giant problem I have, and I keep wanting to write an article about this for Wirecutter. So many people nowadays buy products, active, audio products. I'll say, I'm sorry, you want to be picky about it. So let's say powered audio products.
I want to be correct about it, sir.
Oh God, they're powered amplified audio products. So many people buy them based on watts, right? PA speakers, for example, are a great example of that because they're sold by watts. People go, oh, this one's 500 watts. This is 1,000 watts. So the 1,000 watts is double, therefore better.
Yeah.
But of course, the actual, as Gene points out, the actual output of the product, the actual output in decibels, SPL, that you get from the product is dictated not only by the amplifier, but also by the sensitivity of the speaker that it's hooked up to.
Yep.
So the amplifier power rating is not very meaningful until you measure the full output. And this is where there's a new standard called AES 75. That's Audio Engineering Society 75. And it seems to have come out of Meyer Sound. And they certainly came out with the test noise signal that you use. And the idea is that you play this test noise signal, and then which mimics the content of music. And you get a baseline level, you get a baseline frequency response measurement, an RTA measurement showing the spectrum of this noise, right? And you keep raising the level in, I think, 3 dB chunks until the frequency response goes out by more than, it's 2 or 3 dB. 2 dB within a certain bandwidth, but 3 dB within the entire bandwidth. And, so it'll go out because, the product's limiting the bass, so the bass will start to sag, or you can get power compression in the drivers or the amp or whatever, right? Which means the bass will start to sag, or it can go out because you start to have, distortion harmonics come up in the treble, and that'll kick you also out of the bandwidth. That would give you an actual output of a product at 1 meter, right?
Yeah.
I'm the only person I know who's tried it. I'm more in the consumer realm, not in the pro realm. Maybe some of the pro people have tried it. I don't know. Obviously, Meyer Sound did. I've worked on it. I've tried. There's a free program you can get from, I think it's Eclipse Audio. I couldn't get it to work with Bluetooth speakers. I mean, it's really designed for PA speakers, so I don't blame them. It basically saw a Bluetooth speaker and said, "What, you're telling me this thing is a speaker?" But this is sort of my big push, is we are stuck in this world of, measurements of amplifiers and measurements of speakers that really date back to the days of, not Julian Hirsch, because he kind of retired before modern measurement really started to happen. but, you know, that date back at least, you know, a good 20 years, 25 years or something, right? And we're still kind of looking at the world of measurement like that when the world of measurement is powered product, right? Everything we buy is powered. I mean, the headphones we buy now are powered. And yeah, you can get passive headphones, but that's strictly an enthusiast product. You don't see them on the street. Right. Rarely. I mean, if you're in the New York subway, you might see somebody with wired earphones, but it'll be rare. Almost everyone's got AirPods or something like that, right?
I'm starting to see more of them, though, and I'm seeing like the old style that look like the old Sony headphones with the foam, you know, that just sort of the orange foam that just sort of sits on your ear, and a cord going into a hoodie pocket. And I don't know what that cord's attached to, but you know, I'm guessing it's maybe not an iPhone. Yeah. So
I mean, there's no jacks, so you'd have to have a dongle, which is a pretty well, they're cheap and good, but they're an esoteric product. I mean, you can get them for $50. I've got one sitting right here on my desk from the Shanling UA1 Plus, which is just a fantastic product, and it's like $40 or $50. But still, very few people have those. And we're in a world of powered audio products. So this new amplifier rule largely ignores that. And what I want to see is once I get past the Black Friday rush, and I have my 2 weeks of December where I really don't have a lot to do before I leave for vacation, I'm going to dig into more AES 75 and see if I can figure out a way to get it to work for me, because none of my peers seem to be interested. And maybe the Klippel guys like Aaron Hardison and Amir at Audio Science Review I'm sure Klippel will add this, and then maybe they can, you know, since they just throw a speaker in that thing and push the button and walk away for an hour. You know, so they can get it done, but, you know, they got $100K worth of equipment. I'm going to see if I can get it done with just a real-time analyzer. And, you know, I've got the Clio analyzer. It supposedly can do it, but I looked at the routine. It's like, oh, geez, it's super complicated, and it requires like monitoring the output of the amplifier, which you can't do with these products, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
You're going to tear the soundbar open or the Bluetooth speaker open and tap into the amplifier. Well, you won't be able to get the thing back together again, probably.
So I was talking to Dan Loftman about a year ago. People know Dan Loftman as the owner of Emotiva. And he was talking about how he and one of his guys were like, we're to sort of explore, like, what's in a soundbar? Like, what is, let's get an estimation of what the manufacturing is like. He didn't tell me specifically that they were thinking of going into the soundbar business, but I don't know why else you'd be buying soundbars and pulling them apart. Whatever. All I know is they were buying soundbars and pulling them apart. And he was like, Dennis, one of them we found had 85 screws. He's like, none of them could we put back together after we disassembled them. It just, like, never again could we put together a functioning product again once we took them apart. So, that's a problem.
This is not relevant to active. I mean, for the manufacturer, you know, if you're LG or somebody, right? Well, you can go, you got a million samples of it, and you can go yank them out, or you can pull them out during development or production or whatever. And so then you could measure it, but then again, it doesn't mean anything, or doesn't mean that much, because you don't know what the sensitivity of your speakers is. And that could be a 10 decibel difference easily.
Right. Yeah. So and that's a big point that Gene's making. So it's a good one.
If they talk to me, that's the whole thing of like people like me. It's like, oh, they should have talked to me, right? Which is basically what Gene's saying. Gene said that a lot. People are usually better off if they do talk to Gene. I will have to say.
That's a good point. So, that is a good point.
They probably should talk to Gene. But anyway, you know, they've kind of created a standard here that's great for John Atkinson, but John Atkinson's service is this little teeny tiny market now that's shrinking, and even a lot of what's in stereophile is now active product or passive or powered product. Oh God, It's so annoying. Powered speakers, and some of them are active.
You're mad at me about this, man.
Well, but you know, and that's the thing is we do have, I will say, you know, for subwoofers, almost all of which are powered, you know, there is a standard, CTA 2010, and it works great. And lots of people, you know, Gene and I both do it, and other people have done it. And they get pretty similar results. I mean, they're off by a decibel or two here or there because, you got different test environments and different test gear, and it's kind of hard to get it exact. But, you're pretty close. You can take you can take all my CTA 2010 measurements and you can compare everything, right? And Gene's will be pretty close, and actually even the manufacturers will be pretty close because there's no way to cheat this thing as there is with amplifier measurements. So what we need is something that can measure the acoustical output of powered speakers. And Don Keel, actually, who was the co-developer of CTA 2010, proposed something, but it was a very loosey-goosey proposal. It's basically kind of moving CTA 2010 up to audio, up to, mid-range and treble frequencies, right?
Right.
Which I have a copy of his paper on that, but it's very kind of loosey-goosey and there's no measurement standard. It's more like, well, turn it up until it sounds bad. Okay. Well,
can I ask you a question real quick about your CTA 2010 data? You have got I know I've seen your spreadsheet. You've got a lot of subwoofers in there. You've got a lot of SPL data on a lot of these things. Have you at any point correlated SPL output with the power of the amp to see, like, is there any trend whatsoever in terms of like this much more power equaling this much more in terms of SPLs, or like, can you say anything about that, or is it just completely uncorrelated?
Well, I have done some development consulting on subwoofers before with a manufacturer, trying out different amplifiers and different drivers and things, and running CTA 2010 on all the different combinations. And if your driver can handle it, if you double your amplifier power, you're going to get 3 dB more output. If your driver can handle it. But that's a big question. Can your driver handle it? Number one. Number two, what kind of processing do you have between, in front of the amplifier? Do you have a limiter in front of the amplifier? Your limiter may not. I measure a lot of subs where you can't get them up to the CTA 2010 distortion thresholds because a limiter's dialing them back.
Right.
So, they could go higher, but they choose not to because they want the distortion to be lower.
Right.
So, it's all things being equal. Yeah. If you have a driver that's, 3 dB more sensitive, you'll get 3 dB more output. If you have an amplifier that's twice as powerful, you get 3 dB more output. But, it's so complicated now that all things being equal, things are never equal. So,
yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Anyway, buddy, anything else to say about this one before we move on?
I just invite manufacturers and fellow reviewers to join my quest to develop industry-wide, widely accepted, easy-to-do standards that let us realistically and meaningfully measure the output of powered speakers.
Wow.
Get with it, people.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, let's go get a drink of water and take a break because we need to come back and talk about amplifiers again?
More amplifiers. It's the special edition of Audio Unleashed that is just about amplifiers.
Whoa. You took my job away from me, man. I've got one job.
It's a special edition of Audio
Unleashed
that's just about amplifiers.
Yeah. All right, we'll be right back.
We are back. This is Audio
Unleashed.
And we're going to talk about a review that has been kind of kicking around our idea board for a little bit, but we decided to finally go ahead and do it because we have a little space, and plus we like to play our hits, and our most popular segments are usually the ones where we're trashing other reviewers. So always nicely, always with respect.
Yeah.
With respect.
With respect for the truth. Let's just say that.
Right. Well, and also people. We're sympathetic to people, and we're flawed people as well. And so
of course.
We've been in their shoes. We've made bad decisions. We've made good decisions, hopefully more good than bad. So we can be sympathetic to other people's decisions. But this decision was made by Alan Surcom at Hi-Fi Plus. And also, and you just turned me on to this reprint from Hi-Fi News and Record Review. Both of these are British publications. This, I guess, probably, is the question here, Dennis, are British hi-fi publications more corrupt than American ones?
Ooh.
I don't know. We're going to dig deep into this controversy and find it, because it just occurred to me like, this is a little over the top. I don't think Stereophile would have been as gentle. But anyway, so...
Although there's the one with the moons. What's the one with the moons, man?
6 moons. 6 moons.
Okay. I knew there's either wolves or moons or something. This can run in that, man. Come on.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Except it would have to be 3 times as long.
There would have to be some mention about some esoteric beverage or something. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this is just great. There are 2 kinds of this. I'm reading from Alan's review. There are 2 kinds of people in audio: those who only look at the price and power output of the Trafomatic Audio Rhapsody, which is a tube amp, which I think is like, was it 25 or 30 grand?
20,000 pounds. Yeah.
20,000 pounds. That's about $50. So, no, I'm kidding. We're about at parity, so somewhere around $20,000. And those who only look at the price and power output of the Trafomatic Audio Rhapsody, and those who've heard it, okay,
just found that out. 20,000 pounds is $26,000. So
okay, so be an idiot and just look at the spec sheet if you like, but if you want your music to sound like music and not vaguely organized noise, this sits at the top of the list. So I have some problems with this.
No way.
First of all, I take exception to this idea of music sounding like vaguely organized noise because, first of all, this amplifier, it's not like with this amplifier, Celine Dion sounds like music, and if you play it through some other amplifier, it sounds like the Butterworth House Band.
Wow. I was going to go with like an AOL dial-up tone, but geez. Okay. There's an analogy for you.
But, this is just this is so over the top absurd. I mean, demonstrate to me that any amplifier, any audio amplifier transforms music into vaguely organized noise. I mean, that is a statement. I mean, you really don't want to be talking about people who don't agree with you are idiots when you say things like this, right?
Yeah.
Because but
it's a pretty common canard in the high end, though. I mean, I remember once I was in a discussion on our buddy Steve Guttenberg's Facebook page, and somebody came in referencing somebody else talking about MP3. And this dude came in and said, MP3 is not music. MP3 is a thing that idiots think sounds like music. And it's like, what is that?
Yeah.
What? What? So, I mean, Alan's not alone in that respect.
That's true. I mean, this looks like a beautiful amplifier. I mean,
gorgeous.
And they're showing in the Hi-Fi News thing, they're showing how it's built inside. It's very nice, and it looks beautiful. It's got this beautiful red finish on the outside, and it's got some power meters on the front. That's very nice. But, there's kind of there's a little bit of a technical breakdown that's more, really just kind of parroting what the manufacturer says, which is, commonplace because we're not all engineers. But
I've got an anecdote about that, by the way.
Oh, really? Well, would you like to share it now?
Oh, sure. Some time back, let's just say I did a review of a product, and I thought the review was very, very well balanced overall. And after it had been all laid out, in fact, and everything was sent to the manufacturer for fact checking, and basically the fact check came back, and the request, it wasn't, it was a kind request, and it was a request. This was an ask, not a demand, but the request was that I basically work more of the marketing language from the press release into my review. And it was kind of like, no, like I've already said the thing. I've described things the way I heard them, my experience, and I've tried my best to sort of, approach the objective performance criteria in the best way I can. I'm not working marketing language from the press release end, but there is pressure in our industry to do that, and I think for a lot of people it's just easier. If you can pull a couple of quotes from the press release, then the manufacturer is going to be happier with you, and your job's easier. So, it is what it is.
But anyway, Alan's raving about this thing and talking about how the Rhapsody plays with such a vivid realness that you might never want to listen to anything else. I mean, it's an amplifier. But let's find out exactly what this amplifier does. And courtesy of Paul Martin, who's the, I guess, editor-in-chief of Hi-Fi News, and also the technical editor. He's like Atkinson used to be at Stereophile. And so he does the measurements and everything. And you sent me this great review. Now, the review's by Ken Kessler. It has a badge that says Hi-Fi News Outstanding Product. Because, and their standard for outstanding is the same as, it's actually identical to that of Hi-Fi Plus. Which is some dude sat there in his T-shirt and underwear and listened to this tube amp and said it sounded musical.
I disagree with you. Come on, these guys were probably wearing Hawaiian shirts, man. That's the uniform these days.
No, I think, but they don't want to. But they don't want to be like Guttenberg. And Guttenberg has the Hawaiian shirt thing monopolized.
He actually makes it look cool.
Anyway, so Paul Martin does. They have this rave review of it. And they give it a badge for, best whatever, except you look at these measurements and it does kind of okay into 8 ohms, but then you put a 4 ohm load on it and it's down, about 4 dB, more than 4 dB.
At 10K.
At 10 kilohertz.
Yeah.
And that's a very audible roll-off. And, almost no matter what speakers you have, most speakers have a dip down to 4 ohms somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And you better hope that your impedance at the higher frequencies doesn't dip down low. You better, have a pretty, you better have an unimpeded 8 ohm or better tweeter in there.
And we should say, that's really common with electrostats to have, your big impedance dip in the high frequencies, not the low frequencies. So, yeah. So, and I don't think it'd be out of line to say that you might see, electrostats, connected to an amplifier like this. I mean, I think the kind of person who would be drawn to this amp, which is again beautiful, would be drawn to electrostatic speakers. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting match.
But he talks about how these, the variations in the bass will not be disruptive because it's got a big output transformers, so it's going to change the sound of the speaker that you hook it up to. Because it's going to react with, the high output impedance of the transformers is going to react with the input impedance of the speakers and change the frequency response. That's just all there is to it. But, he says, but the Rhapsody driving a tougher speaker via its 4 ohm tap might look and sound very different indeed. So I guess if you use the 4 ohm tap, it just has this giant, has this just giant dive. And this is just not engineering. This is like Bruno Putzis was talking about, where, you just sort of have something that you say you like and declare that as your reference, and then some guy sits around and listens to it and declares something else. And I don't have a problem with that so much, except that this is done in totally uncontrolled listening conditions. If they A/B'd this with pick your amplifier, I don't care which one. If they did a blind A/B at match levels, that would say something. If this thing beat up on, if you had, let's just say, a Parasound or an NAD, some just good solid state amp, right? And this thing beat it in blind tests, well, great. If you compared this to a Rogue Audio amp that is a tenth of the price or something, how's it compared to that? Better or worse, or the same, or those are meaningful tests. That would mean something. But in this case, you're taking a product that has substantial technical flaws and that has relatively low rated output of, did Paul even measure the output? I think he's just talking. He's basically just talking.
The deck says, it's a 300 B-bass triode tube amp rated at a mighty 20 watts.
Yeah, it's rated at 20 watts. Did he measure the output?
Oh, that's a good point.
All he shows is a frequency response, which is weirdly tilted. We don't know why.
Yeah.
That's a bad decision. Don't always let your art director determine how your charts are displayed. That's been a lifelong fight for me.
Yeah.
Still is. But it's just, there's, does this thing actually make 20 watts?
Then the next page, there's a distortion versus frequency versus power output graph.
Oh, where's that? I missed it.
Just scroll down to the last page of the PDF that I sent you.
Oh, I missed that. I missed that last page. There's his thing.
Yeah.
And so what's it actually making?
A lot of distortion in the bass. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, goodness gracious. Yeah, it's not 10 watts. Okay. Goodness gracious.
Yeah. They better keep this thing in England.
Right. Oh, 1 watt.
Because it's going to run afoul of the FTC rules really fast over here.
1 watt into 8 ohms, 5 watts okay. So 5 watts into 8 ohms is the red trace there.
Okay.
Wow.
Oh, so he's basically saying power output 12 watts into 8 ohms, 11 watts into 4 ohms.
I see it now. Yeah. Yeah.
At,
so
1% distortion.
Right. Right. 3% total harmonic distortion is what he's saying. Or less than 3%. Yeah.
Less than
that's less
so
than 3%.
he's really being forgiving with this thing.
Right. And with the dynamic power, he's doing less than 5% THD. So there you go. At less than 5% THD, it does make 20 watts. So wow.
So does my phone. I mean,
yeah.
It's just like, this is so forgiving. And this is why I really think this is, all these guys are just saying, oh, this is so incredible, but we're supposed to just believe what they say. And what was that influenced by? Was that purely their own impression? Was it based on they had a nice dinner with this guy who runs the company? Was it based on the marketing BS that this company puts out? Was it based on the fact that the thing's red? We just don't know.
I mean, that is objectively the best color for amplifiers, though.
It is. I'll give them that much. That was a smart decision.
Yeah.
Probably the only smart decision they made. But
no, those VU meters are fire, dude. What's wrong with you? Those are some cool VU meters.
They're going to sell a ton of these. They might literally sell a ton because the thing weighs 32 kilograms. So how many of those is a metric ton? Is 1,000 kilograms. So what is that? That's they just got to sell about 300. So they might sell a ton of these. based on this review, and the both of these reviews. But this just shows the complete absurdity at this point of, look, and this might be, hey, I might try this amp and might find something to love about it. Mm-hmm. And maybe ultimately they're right, that there's just something magical in this thing. But they have to do something other than just saying, I think it's magical.
Yes. Yes.
That's all they're doing, is they're basically saying, I think it's magical, and they're providing no evidence that confirms that it's magical. Did multiple listeners in a blind test confirm that it's magical? Could you tell in a blind test that it was magical versus what other amplifiers? If the measurements weren't horrible, that would be something. You could at least say, you can go grab a Parasound or a D'Agostino or a Bryston or whatever, and those things are all going to measure pretty good. Mm-hmm. And you can at least say, well, it performs its function as it's supposed to, and you can hook it up to whatever speaker you want, and it'll work fine, and it won't really change the sound of the speaker and all that. This thing, it's harder to describe this as a properly functioning product. Mm. So they have nothing to go on other than it's sort of like, Ezekiel saw the wheel. Well, what do we have to go on besides Ezekiel's word?
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't mean Ezekiel saw the wheel just because he says he did.
Yep. Yeah. It's a good point. Good point.
Maybe he was on some hallucinogens, or maybe he was deranged, or who knows what. Maybe he did see a wheel, but, probably not. So... Yeah. With this, it's like maybe these guys did have a magical, it says right here, magical amp, all caps, bold, in the Hi-Fi News thing. Magical amp, magical. And no, it's just an amplifier. Yeah. I could, a good old fashioned would make me think a lot of things are magical. So,
well, also a good recording can make you think things are magical, man.
Well, it's more to the point. Yeah.
I've said this before a million times, and I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but I absolutely cannot use Here Comes the Sun as test material, because, God, that song just wrecks me emotionally, man. It puts me into a state where I am not objective. And so you could pretty much play Here Comes the Sun through anything, and I'm going to be like, this is the best thing I've ever heard. So, maybe put that to the side. And Alan talks at one point about, at the end, he talks about how he's listening to How to Disappear Completely by Radiohead, and saying, what is the point that he made? He was in stunned silence when he listened to it. He played it and then had to listen again in stunned silence because, quote, I hadn't heard that much from the album since the first time I played it. And I was reminded of, a few weeks ago, we got a comment from our friend Mark Block, who was talking about, when we were talking about LUFS, and I said, I use LUFS to balance our voices. And he was like, it's interesting, when I listen to you guys through my iPhone speakers, Dennis, you're louder. And you made the point. Yeah, when you get into speakers that are, not full bandwidth and have frequency anomalies, you start to hear this phenomenon where you're hearing things that you've never heard before. Yeah. And I kind of wonder if that's what's going on here when we look at the actual measurements of this amp and how it is going to be very load dependent, and it is going to sound different depending on what speakers you're plugging into it. Maybe Alan is just hearing things boosted in the music that he normally doesn't hear boosted, and that is having a reaction. He's doing the whole, I heard things I've never heard in the recording before. So it may be that he had a legitimate experience with these and just didn't quite understand why, Well, yeah. And also, even through exactly the same system, you can play something 2 days in a row and hear something new in it. Yeah. Even if it's like, I listen to old, Yes albums and stuff, and like, I hear things I never heard before because they're pretty complicated. And it's dudes playing instruments with, with no, I don't think with a click track or anything like that. And just dudes sitting there, and there's a lot of subtleties to the things that they did. Mm-hmm. And then harmonically, there's all kind of things going on. And I might have missed that, so-and-so did
some kind of substitution for that little scalar run or whatever, right? And there's always just tons of, I barely even listen to the drums on those recordings. I should listen to the drums, see what Bill Bruford and Alan White were doing, and
right.
It's like, there's just so much you can, that statement of like, I heard things I never heard before is just the most meaningless possible statement in audio.
Yeah.
Are we done?
We're done, buddy.
Our ritual trashing of this review?
Yeah. What are we doing for credits this week, man?
Well, I'm just way too wrapped up in my pre-Black Friday craziness to get any new music done, I think.
Yeah. I've got some ideas that I'm working on in terms of percussion, but they're not fully baked yet. So,
since when did that stop you?
That's an excellent point, sir. Maybe we'll have some new music next time, but not this time. Yeah,
probably this time.
Editing.
Just we'll be playing the old hits.
Yeah.
I'm editing. Yep.
Yeah, and
it's a Butterburger production.
Absolutely, man. Shout out to Cornell for that one. Anything else?
Yeah.
Any other credits we need to give?
No. Patreon segment coming up.
We do need to say one more time, people, go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/audio unleashed, and ask us things that you want us to answer on video, man, because we're doing it, but we don't quite know when. I mean, look, sometime in the next few weeks, we're going to do it, but we're going to do it when we feel like we've got enough good questions. And hey, by the way, people, we've got questions from Dr. Sean Olive. We've got questions from Dr. Floyd Toole. We've got questions from Jeff Morrison and Daryl Wilkinson. So, this is going to be pretty fun. And go ask us your questions. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that. Well, I'm excited. So let's wrap this thing up.
All right. Everybody, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Patrons, stick around. We got one more for you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you liked what you heard and wish there'd been a little bit more of it, we got some good news for you.
Indeed, we do. If you check out patreon.com/audio unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else.
And sometimes it's like a day or two early. Sometimes it's nearly a week. We never really know until we start editing.
But the big plus is that you get extended cuts of every episode. And usually that's going to mean a whole extra segment that's about maybe a geekier topic or something that's a little more personal to us or something that's just going to really appeal to the hardcore Audio Unleashed listener.
Yeah, what it boils down to is if you're somebody who would support Audio Unleashed on Patreon, we're going to make sure the bonuses to every episode are really aimed straight at your interests.
Yeah, and so if you want to hear these segments, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is less than I spend every single day on my cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks to write my boring articles.
Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/audio unleashed.
Or audio
unleashed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.